So yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. I traveled all the way from San Francisco, California to talk today. So I'm excited to talk about Optimizely and all that we've done to implement the ideas from ESP and Lean Kanban to really transform the way we build product at Optimizely. So a little bit about myself. I am the head of design. So my background really comes more on the design side and specifically user experience and product design. I have an engineering background as well, but I'm less familiar with the Lean Kanban. I've only gotten into that world in the past couple of years. And a little bit about Optimizely. It's based in San Francisco. We were founded in 2009, so we're a young company. We have about 400 employees, and we build A/B testing software. We started out building A/B testing software for the web. That's what this website shows. And we've kind of expanded into mobile and other products since then. And really we're on this mission to experiment everywhere. We want to enable companies to embrace experimentation and the idea of failing fast and trying out ideas, which is a lot of what the talks, the conference have been about so far as well, to help them innovate and grow. So the story starts back in 2012. And I joined the company then, so over 5 years ago. And this was the entirety of the company at that point. We all fit in one room. This is a conference room in Santa Cruz. We were, of course, very small. We were nimble. And when I joined, our process was essentially no process at all. Engineers would just own a feature from beginning to end. Designers would kind of maybe work on it towards the end to make it look pretty. But that was about it. There was no low coordination necessary because we had 7 or 8 engineers. Everyone knew what they were doing. The founder, of course, was still there. He could drive a vision very well. We had one PM who was also the co-founder. So it was just really simple to build product back then. But of course, you know how the story goes. That's not going to scale. So we kept hiring engineers, and everything kind of went fine until we got to about 17. And then we got to the 18th engineer, and everything kind of looked like this. We just kind of broke. We couldn't really ship anything for many, many months. People weren't sure what they were supposed to be working on. They weren't sure what the most important things were. There was code conflicts and commit errors and lots of bugs, and basically things just ground to a halt. And we kind of got to this point where we were like, this doesn't work anymore. We need some process to make forward movement. So we started doing Scrum, in quotes, and this is a stand-up in quotes, because we kind of just aped some of the rituals of Scrum without really understanding what they were or how they worked. So we do stand-ups, and we would sometimes do sprint plannings, but we didn't have any retrospectives or sprint reviews, and there was no real guidance or anything from that. So we realized what we need to do is move on to more formal Scrum. And actually, this is kind of what we were like. I like this Dilbert comic. So essentially, the point here, boss says, we're moving to an agile methodology for software development. I don't know all the details, but I think one of you has to be the designated Scrum bag. Does that sound right? And then Dilbert says, it's better than I expected. And that's kind of, I think, what we were doing at the time. We didn't know the details, but we were like, we need to do some sort of agile Scrum something or other. So we decided to hire a Scrum bag, this guy, Keith. So he's my colleague who was supposed to be here today with me, and unfortunately couldn't make it. But we hired him in 2014 as our development director. And that was when we decided to really get serious about Scrum and really get a lot better at shipping product. So we moved into this kind of segment model, which for those of you who are familiar with Agile, with Spotify's model, as I'm sure everyone is, we kind of just aped a lot of that. We put a group of engineers and a designer and a PM into a product area and gave them a goal, and they each ran Scrum their own way. Well, not their own way, but they each ran Scrum kind of independently of each other. And we had quarterly release planning where we'd all get together as a group and talk about what are we going to do for the next quarter, what are we building, what are the dependencies, and then they'd plan out kind of sprint by sprint. So this helped us make a lot more forward progress. We were able to ship product again, and we got the trains moving. But it didn't scale super well. So after 37 sprints of doing Scrum, everyone was kind of just broken by the whole process. So this is towards the end of 2015. And it's really just grinds people down. Especially in Scrum, what happens a lot is you have these sprints, and ours were 2 weeks, and you make a goal for what you want to get done by the end of the 2 weeks, and you get maybe 80% of the way there, but then the 20% is left over and spills over the next week, so then things get pushed back because of that, and that compounds again and again and again, and it felt like we were kind of perpetually behind. Actually, my next slide kind of goes through this too. So that leads to low morale, especially in engineering. But also kind of across the org, it doesn't feel good to be like behind on goals. Especially when we're making quarterly goals, we'd have like one green goal, one yellow goal, and then one that was like red that we just didn't do at all. And that obviously feels bad. And that breeds distrust across the org in engineering's ability to actually ship. Quality was kind of inconsistent because we're missing goals and trying to rush to get things done. Bugs would be an issue. Near and dear to my heart is that design and research isn't well integrated. Scrum is a process that's really designed for engineers to make engineering more efficient. But it doesn't tell you how to fit design and research into there. It doesn't tell you, like, how do we understand the customer problems and their needs? How do we design solutions that really meet those needs? And how do we verify once they're shipped that we're delivering value to them? And so I was hearing a lot of this from my designers, and I was seeing it myself. And as I said, all of this kind of led to low confidence across the org and our ability to deliver. We were also pretty rigid and unresponsive to changing customer needs and changing business needs. So when we'd have quarterly planning, we'd say like, we're committing to building these like 3 features. And then maybe halfway through the quarter, we'd realize one of those isn't worthwhile or worth doing. We'd cancel it, and we put all our effort into a different one, or we'd change direction. And then the rest of the company would be like, why are you doing that? You're failing and missing your goals. Or we'd have high priority stuff come in. We'd say, we can't do that. We committed to these other quarterly goals. And we weren't really adaptable or changing to what the business needed at the time. And ultimately, all this leads to customers not getting enough value out of what we're releasing to them. So do these problems sound familiar to people who've worked with Scrum? Yeah. So I think this is really well illustrated with this crisis moment of personalization. So at the end of 2015, we released this big product called Personalization that was trying to help our customers target experiences to their customers. So if you think about Amazon, when you go to their homepage, you are seeing a different homepage from everyone else because they're targeting products that you would like to buy or products you've previously seen. And we wanted to bring that power to our customers. But the problem here was that we knew that was a vague thing customers wanted to do. We zoomed kind of straight into solution mode and spent the better part of 2015 trying to build that. And really the huge mistake we made was, besides just kind of skipping over what the customer needs, was that we put a whole team on it from day one. So we had a group of like 10 engineers, a couple designers, a couple PMs, and they got there, and we were like, okay, we should ship personalization. And the engineers were like, what are we doing, guys? And then the designers and PMs were like, we just got here, we don't know what we're building yet, we need a chance to figure this out. And so we were already like behind on day one. We were rushing through understanding what the customer wanted, and we were under pressure to build, get designs ready for engineering. And this really led to a solution that missed the mark for our customers. We've righted the ship since then. We've iterated and improved a lot. But at the time, this is something the whole company kind of saw. This didn't really work. And Scrum wasn't a process that really supported these newer, bigger, innovative efforts. So around this time, as Wolfgang mentioned, Keith kind of like came across this presentation on ESP from Lean Kanban of Central Europe. And I think he took a masterclass on this too and learned a lot more about ESP and Kanban and how we could evolve our system. Also around this time, we brought in a product management consultant named Marty Kagan. Because after we had this kind of launch of personalization that was really hard on the whole company, that failed, we decided we needed to get somebody in to help us figure out how do we develop our software better. So Marty Kagan was that person. And the big thing that I took away from this was he talked about all the problems that I just did about single track Scrum. And he started talking about dual track Scrum, which is this idea of doing discovery and customer development at the same time as delivery, but they're kind of these separate work streams. And they had these arrows that flow into each other, and somehow they're connected, but it was kind of vague, and this picture is kind of why I have it up there, is that like I didn't really understand what it meant exactly, and he didn't go into details about how it worked. But the takeaway for me was that design and research should be a separate process from delivery, but connected in some way. So combining that kind of input with Keith's knowledge of ESP, we started working on commonizing our first system, which was design, and which is also my organization. So we started here for a couple reasons. A big one is that design is a smaller team, and they didn't really have a process in place to replace. It was essentially something that, like, they knew Scrum wasn't working for them, they were eager for change, and I was eager to help them work better. And so it's much easier to change their work habits than engineering's. So to do this, I started implementing a discovery Kanban solution, and I had a few goals that I was shooting for when I started to do this. The first is I wanted to make sure we were prioritizing the biggest customer problems that we had. Product like personalization that we launched kind of missed the mark, and we had this opportunity cost of not solving long-standing customer problems as a result of spending all our time on this other vague, big new launch. And that leads to problems like churn and customers not being happy. Second, I wanted to make space for design and research. This is kind of obvious from what I was just saying, but they didn't fit into Scrum at all, so I wanted to make sure the system was designed for them. And finally, I needed to improve coordination and alignment. There was kind of issues as we scaled with, like, who's doing what problems are we trying to solve and why, and people stepping on each other's toes, and all kinds of fun stuff like that. So first I'm going to talk about how we work now. And in Kanban, they always say start with what you do and iterate from there. So I'm going to talk about the double diamond model of design. Has anyone heard of this by chance? Cool, no one's heard of it. One person. So this is kind of just a general framework for solving problems. And it's split into two phases. The first is problem understanding, and the second is solution exploration. And what I really like about this model of thinking about design work is that it's really just a framework for solving problems, and it kind of applies to any type of problem in any industry. It's not specific to, like, UI design or product design. So the way it works is you start with just a general problem area. In the case of personalization, this is like customers are having a hard time targeting personalized experiences to their customers. Then you go into a research phase. And the whole thing here is you're trying to go broad and divergent, hence the diamond visualization, of gathering as much information as you can about this problem. When it comes to design and product development, this means doing, like, customer research, doing ethnography, doing, like, surveys, looking at product analytics, really any data that is relevant to this general problem area you want to gather. And then you go into a synthesize phase, where you take all the data you have and you filter it down into a more specific understanding of the problem and a more specific understanding of the user needs. And basically what you're doing is you're separating the act of creating or finding information from that of synthesizing it and understanding it. And then you get these specific problems. And then you go into the solution exploration side of things, which is another diamond where you try to explore as broadly as you can how to solve this problem. Now that you have a good understanding of what the problem is, you should try to go through a wide array of options to figure out what's the best one. But once again, this is a divergent phase where you're not trying to limit your thought. You're trying to be as creative and crazy as you can, come up with as many ideas as you can. You remove constraints like technical feasibility for the time being to try and find the best solution out there. And then you go into a refinement stage, which is also convergent, where you iterate on solutions until you find one that really meets customer needs. And this is where you do things like user testing and prototyping, and you continue to iterate and refine over time. And at the end, you should hopefully have a solution to the problem that you found from the beginning. And the thing that's really cool about this is it's meant to foster creativity and finding new innovative ideas, because you're separating the act of filtering or editing ideas from that of creation. And a lot of research has shown those are very different mindsets. And I think this visualization of how design can be done really illustrates that very well. And finally, I know this looks kind of like a linear thing, but it's really fairly iterative. A lot of it has to do with being more of a mindset. That you should understand there's different phases of thought. When you're thinking about the solutions, it's informing your understanding of the problem, which then informs your understanding of the solution. So there's a lot of back and forth here, but in general, this is a really good framework for thinking about solving problems. So this is kind of how we work now. I use this a lot in my own work, and not just for like visual design problems, but even like for designing the discovery system, I was using this whole framework. So as you may be able to guess, what I did was I basically said, okay, let's turn those into columns of work and put an input and output queue on both sides so we can keep track of what's to do and what's done. And use that as the start of our discovery process. And then that will feed into engineering. And as personalization kind of taught the whole company, when you put a whole team on a problem and the engineers are expecting to build stuff from day one, you kind of cut out all of the creativity in this part of the problem. And so I wanted to really separate out, like, we shouldn't start working on delivering something to customers until we've gone through this process first. So this is kind of what our process looked like at that point. We had a problem understanding where general problem areas and ideas fed into it. And those feed into solution exploration. There's some loops. And then eventually we get a finished solution. There's a big line there. And then we work on delivering it to customers. So the key of this is that we don't start working on it or delivering it to customers until we've vetted that the solution actually solves the problem that we set out to solve, and we're committed to building it. And one of the key things here is that there's a lot of messiness on the left side, or my right side. And we want to keep the messiness over when it's cheap to fail and kind of mess around with new ideas by having a small team on it, just like a designer and a PM or a researcher, and let ourselves kind of mess around in that side of things. And by the time it gets to engineers, we know what we're doing. We're confident in the solution we're delivering. So to start implementing this is a prototype I made of the board itself. I just wanted to see, like, does this kind of general idea work? I started writing down people's projects on Post-it notes and putting them on this board. I made some notes in blue here about like what I should improve and what didn't work. I started showing it to people, and designers really liked it. So I built it out to be a little bigger. I started tracking the work of one specific team on there to start getting feedback on it, and to start iterating and see once again what worked, what doesn't. I made it even bigger. I added another team to get more feedback, and then eventually we moved to a new floor and have a big giant wall where we have all of our work tracked on it, and all of my design team's work is on here. So here's a bigger version of the board that also includes the delivery side, which is more what the green cards are. But we use a big physical board in our office. And this works really well for us because, first of all, we're a small company. We're about 400 people. And in the engineering and design org, we have maybe like 120. And we're all co-located in San Francisco, at least for the development side of things. So we can use the physical aspect of this because we're all in one place. So it makes it really easy to have the work on a board. And having it on a board is great because this is in a main walkway that everyone walks through, and everyone sees it, and it's in a very physical place. And so it's a good way to get people used to it and to using it. We also use it for guests. Like when I'm interviewing people, I like to show them the wall and walk through how we develop product here, and they always enjoy that. Same with when we have customers or other guests come by. Our CEO likes to point this out as this is how we develop software. So if it was just trapped in a tool, those type of things would never happen. But the fact that it's up on this physical board in a very visible place helps the whole company kind of see what we're doing, and people who are outside the company can also see what we're doing. And just having the work tracked physically is a good start, but as you know from the ESP cadences, we need to have meetings around this to actually help drive decisions and alignment and prioritization. So every Monday morning, we have what's essentially a service delivery review where the designers and the PMs and often the CEO come by, and we update the board. We look at what's in progress, we pull it through the columns, we pull in new work as it comes up. And when I first implemented this, it was the first time that the PMs and the designers all talked together as a group. Under that old segment model that we use from Spotify, the groups essentially planned in silos, and so the coordination and alignment just wasn't there. But now that we had the group all come together to talk about the work in progress, there's a lot more shared understanding of who was doing what the priorities were, and it prompted a lot of good conversations. So that kind of leads me back to some of the goals I had. So improving coordination and alignment is where I'm going to start, actually, and go bottom up. So throughput's doubled on the design team specifically. I know this because I have these really fun spreadsheets where I keep track of all the numbers and dates for how stuff moves through the system. And a big reason that this is the case is because low priority work has been eliminated. And my favorite example of this is when I first started getting work on the board and talking about it, a designer wrote down what they're doing and put it up there. And the PM looked at it and said, wait, why are you doing that? We're never going to build it. And that immediately just showed, like, yes, people are doing things that we shouldn't have done, and we need to all be coordinated on who's doing what and why. So that eliminated a lot of waste from the system. Another reason that we're faster is because we've eliminated a lot of meetings per week. So I know this personally because I would get sucked into meetings all the time that were about, hey, we have this project coming up, like we need a designer for it, or what team's going to work on this project, who's doing what. And there was a lot of meetings kind of talking about who's going to do the work, trying to coordinate and align our teams. And I got pulled in those a lot. My designers would also get pulled in those meetings so that they would say, okay, when are you going to start this, or who's going to do this, are you available, yada, yada. PMs were pulled in those meetings, tech leads were in those meetings. They were happening in a lot of places throughout the company. And by having this weekly service delivery review, or discovery planning meeting as I called it, that became the lightning rod where basically we could have those conversations there in real time and make decisions about it and not have to waste time in the other week making meetings on an ad hoc basis. So having this one place where everyone talks about the work in progress and why they're doing it helps us all be more coordinated. And now when designers and PMs meet, it's really to talk about the work itself and not like talking about coordination. So coordination and alignment has improved, which is fantastic. Next is making space for design and research. First thing I want to point out is they have physical space now. There's a physical board where we have their work tracked. And honestly, before this existed, design work wasn't really tracked anywhere. It would sometimes be in Jira because that's what the engineers use, but it's really for engineers. Designers don't like Jira. And because there'd usually be one designer paired with a PM, sometimes two, it was easy for them to just say, okay, you're going to do project X this week, right? And they'd be like, yeah, great. And then they just do it. They didn't really need to be written down anywhere. But what this kind of led to was design and research is seen as this kind of black box where a designer will like go off in a corner for a while and eventually come back with like a finished design and no one really knows where it came from or what they're doing. Same with like research kind of had this problem where it's like, okay, they're talking to customers or generating insights, but we don't know what they're doing or when they're going to come back. So by having this board up here physically in the office, everyone can see it. And by having these different phases, by having different columns that kind of explain what the design work is, it helped to socialize the design process itself to the organization. People could see where work was throughout the system, and they kind of understood better that, okay, designers go through this process of iteration, and they explore solutions. They also talk to customers to understand their needs. And the physical board helped us understand and see design work in this new light that helped people just understand what that work was instead of it being this black box that was invisible. And it really helped change the conversation because like when we'd be in meetings and talking about like where is the work or what do we need to do to make progress, people across the org would say like, oh, we're still trying to understand the problem or we're still exploring solutions or we need to go back a phase because we realize that we don't know enough. And the physical board and having words for these things that we all shared helped people just understand design work a lot better. And it's really was gratifying to me to hear like the CEO and other leaders from like engineering talk about design work in this way, using the words that I have put up on the board. These are some quotes. I do retrospectives with the team every once in a while to get feedback on the process. So people on my team say it's rewarding to see work move through the pipeline. Great way to keep track of your own work. Because as I mentioned, we didn't really track it anywhere. Great visibility on what other designers are working on. This is, of course, the problem when you're planning in silos. People don't know what other teams are doing. But now that we all come together and it's all on a physical board, there's great visibility. And finally, my favorite, so much easier than using /remembering to update Jira. Designers really don't like Jira. So this kind of all illustrates that designers and researchers are happier than they were in the old system. And because I manage the team and I have one-on-ones, I know anecdotally that's true as well, and I get a lot of feedback from them. And finally, it's a great tool for saying no. This is one of my favorites. So after I rolled out this process, our CEO came up to me and he said, hey, I had this great project. Can we put a designer on it? And we described what it was. I knew in my head, like, that's just not a priority. Like, the things the team's doing is already high priority. However, I wasn't going to just, straight out tell them your idea is a bad one, we're not going to do it. Instead, what I did is I said, hey, let's go look at the board and see who's working on stuff and see if we want to stop that work to work on your thing. Essentially, I was pushing the prioritization decision into his hands and making him figure out what are the priorities here. And we went to the board, and he said, okay, like Zach's doing that thing, Sylvia's doing that, yada, yada. And he kind of got to the end and was like, okay, I see everyone's working on high priority things. And he just walked away, and I never heard about the project again after that. So that was a fantastic way that I was able to say no to our CEO without having to say no. And I was able to do that because the work was visibly up on the board. I could very quickly show it to him, and he could quickly see why things were a priority. And he could see that his thing was lower priority than what we were already doing. So that was super cool. So that's making space for research and design. Next, I want to talk about prioritizing the biggest customer problems, which is kind of the hardest one to measure objectively anyway. But I think this story illustrates it well. So around the time that we did personalization, we worked on a project called Recommended Audiences. Now, the whole idea here is that customers were like, we want to know who our customers are or who our different customer segments are so that we can target experiences to them and get more value out of them. So cool, it sounds like a great problem to solve. We built a solution called Recommended Audiences, and it was a flop. And you know, you're thinking, well, there's a customer problem, we have a solution, like what was the issue there? Well, the issue comes back to this model of design. So we essentially skipped over the first diamond of understanding the problem. Like we had a general problem, but we didn't really have a specific understanding of it. And we skipped a lot of the solution exploration part. We didn't really think about many solutions or explore different ways of building this. We just jumped kind of into the first idea we had, started building it, didn't do customer validation or like much testing with it. And we spent like, I think around 2 quarters, maybe more, on this project. Then when we launched, just wasn't very useful to customers. And if we had done the first part of this, what we would have learned is that customers want to know like, who are my highest value customers? Who are more likely to make purchases and things like that. And instead, they got something like this that says like, your traffic source is direct. There's big part of it. It's like, okay, cool. People visit on Sunday. Your browser is Firefox. Like, those aren't the audiences that people want. And because we jumped straight into a solution and started building it immediately, we missed kind of like what was the problem we're trying to solve, and we missed validating it with customers throughout the process. And we eventually killed this project. I mean, it launched, and then months later we killed it. And since then, we haven't had any projects like that. We haven't had a project that was like this big kind of launch that then we had to later kill. And so I think that's a pretty good kind of way of saying that like we've done a better job of responding to customer needs. And actually later in the talk, a little more evidence around this too. So those are the goals that I was shooting for. And then here's our physical board again. So first service to commonize is design. And actually, it's really more like this. It's our discovery process, which has these 2 different boards in it, which feed into our deciding board. You'll notice that we have these D words across the top, which are different than what I just presented. That's because when we kind of look at the whole system, we realized we use Ds across the top just for consistency, so we started doing that when we talk about this at the highest level. So next I want to move on to our delivery system. So delivery is much harder to change. This is what the engineers are doing. This is my colleague Deho setting up the first version of our board. And for this, it's harder to change than the design org because there's a small amount of designers and researchers, whereas there are a lot of engineers. And the engineers are used to Scrum. They've been doing it for a couple of years. And even though it had problems, a lot of engineers still like Scrum. They're used to it. They're comfortable with it. Some hate it, but that's fine too. And also the PMs are used to working in this system where they know how to get shit done in Scrum. So we didn't want to come in and say, hey, everything you're doing is wrong. So we had to kind of start overlaying Kanban on top of our Scrum practices as we started to roll them out. So that's what we started to do, and we started to iterate by having meetings around the board. And the meetings were how we then started driving coordination and alignment. This is the same picture as before, but the meeting idea is the same. We're meeting around the board as a group of managers and product managers and some of the designers, and we're updating the work in progress, same way we are on the design side, but we're just doing it with the engineering side now. So I want to kind of talk through a few features of our board, and I'm going to say we incrementally evolved over time to make all this happen. It wasn't just like a big bang thing. We started out with what we did and incrementally evolved and got people used to it. So first, face magnets. This is a big thing that we use. So first of all, this is kind of how we limit WIP. It's kind of on a per person basis. We essentially say each person has 2 face magnets. You can be on max 2 things, and that's it. And that helps us make explicit trade-offs, like when we move someone around or if we start a new project, that we know that they're not going to be spread too thin. And this also helps swarm projects. So environment is actually a good example of that, where it needs like a front-end engineer, a couple of back-end engineers, SDK engineer. It cuts across teams. And by having these face magnets, we're able to put people on it pretty explicitly. And we can make trade-offs really quickly about who's doing what and why, and if we need to deprioritize something. Those are things that we do very deliberately. More magnets. So just quickly, this is this signals what meetings work's going to be shown at. So like for design review, that's something that designers show their work in progress to get feedback across the org from people on. And TLDR is tech lead design review. And that's the same thing. Engineers show the work that they're doing, how they're going to architect a solution, and they present it at a meeting with other tech leads to get feedback on it. And this is a way we're able to exploit the physicality of the board. We made these magnets so we could signal what's going to be shown where, and the magnets also encourage people to show their work in these different forums. It also helps me drive people to like show work too, because designers can be a little bit shy about that sometimes. And so I can signal, hey, you should be showing this in these meetings. And it's a great way the physical board helps us a lot. We have swim lanes by team. Nothing revolutionary there, but it is really useful so that we can see where is the work, which teams have which work. Is any team overloaded or not? The PMs can use this to make decisions and to drive their teams. And some of our PMs have actually switched from Scrum completely to just relying on the board. And that's something that was not a top-down solution. That's something that we let people kind of move to the system as they wanted to and as they got value out of it. And having swim lanes has helped a lot with that. This is kind of a cool thing. Who's on first? So this is something that I think a PM implemented. So encouraging leadership at all levels. Basically, he was kind of having a hard time knowing who was available, who's on vacation, who's on call for bug duty, who was to do security stuff. And he kind of made this card so we could see where people were. And as people got pulled off work, we could see, okay, they're not doing work on the project they were originally signed to and are instead sucked up with this other thing. And that's helped us be explicit about some of these trade-offs and helps us coordinate and align on the work we're doing. And then dependency tracker. We use this really cool technology called string to manage dependencies. We physically tape the cards together with string. And it's just, once again, it's a physical board, so it's really easy to see. Anyone can see what the dependency is. And it makes us be explicit about not starting work if there's a dependency on something that isn't done yet. And then acceptance criteria is another thing that we have up on the boards and everyone can see it. So by having it visible, anyone can kind of learn it, everyone can figure out how it works, and we don't have to teach people as much. And this also helps us enforce it, because when we talk about the work, we can see what the acceptance criteria is and make sure it's being met as we move it through. And then I just want to call out that Keith, learned about all of these ESP cadences and started implementing these meetings, most of which we actually already had in place, and he's had to add a few like risk review and operations review and stuff. And so here's a picture of our board. This is an old picture, but it's kind of a mid-flight getting developed. So some of the challenges as we rolled this out, a lot of high priority items. People were unwilling to cut things, especially our CEO would say, no, we need to do everything. And over time, he's gotten used to limiting work in progress. He's gotten used to making some of these trade-offs. And so our WIP has gone down, which is great. Customer commitments is a similar problem. We had a lot of customer commitments at one point where we promised to deliver a feature by a certain date. And those are something we couldn't stop doing, meaning we couldn't cancel that work. And so that's gone down, luckily. And now that we're better about planning our work and we know our capacity, we also make fewer of these. And we know how much the system can handle. And finally, changing people's behavior is hard. People are used to the way they do things, and they have knee-jerk reactions to things changing. And so it just takes a lot of time to socialize and get people used to a new system. And one of the cool things about the board being physical is that we can start making changes to it slowly, and they can kind of see those changes and get used to them. And then we kind of enforce it more and more over time, and they get used to that much more easily. So it takes time, but it's possible. So here's a picture of our end-to-end board. Let's get through that. Listen to this wall. Does anyone know where this is by chance? Yeah, I didn't think so. It's in San Francisco. It's actually pretty close to my house. And I just like this picture because we use our wall to drive decision-making, drive priorities and alignment. And so I think this kind of billboard art piece, I'm not even sure what it is a nice way of representing that. So that's our delivery system. I'm quickly going to go through these next two, which is we've been expanding the system from there on either end to really build out the full end-to-end system. So Dream is really where we take ideas and turn them into, or prioritize ideas and turn them into finished solutions. A lot of people talk about their idea pool. That's essentially what the Dream board is. And this is a mess, and it's kind of on purpose, because this type of work is often more innovative work with much bigger, fuzzier problems. Personalization should have been something in here. We knew there was a vague customer need, but we didn't know specifically what it was. So this is our attempt to kind of formalize how do we take those fuzzy ideas, prioritize them, and then how do we track and manage that work. And it's really trying to encourage innovative work. This is kind of our more innovative arm. And we're tracking it in this kind of new way. And I'm still building this out, so this is still kind of like on the bleeding edge of what we're doing. But we are trying to track it more formally. And then on the Delight side, you may notice customers aren't in here. Well, that's what the Delight board is all about. We want to be more explicit about once we launch something to customers, is it actually meeting their needs? Is it driving the KPIs that we thought it would? Is it having a business impact? And once we launch something to customers, we can see, we can track it on this board and make sure that we're then implementing these feedback loops back to the rest of the system, so that as we launch something and learn about it, it's feeding back into like the delivery system if there's bugs, or back into discovery if we need to iterate on solutions, or back into the Dream board if we're finding new needs from that. So by tracking this Delight section more explicitly, we're able to really keep track of what are we launching and is it having an impact or not. And that's something too that we're kind of just starting to flex our muscle at, so I don't really have a picture of it right now. And the other reason that that's important, and also the deliver board is important, is because we're keeping track of beta launches and things going to general availability. And we need to coordinate with our go-to-market function. So go-to-market includes sales, support, and marketing. And when we launch something, marketing typically needs to make communications for it or write a blog post. We need to update our education systems. We need to train sales and support on how to sell it and how to support it. And so by tracking this Delight work, we're able to coordinate with the rest of the organization a lot more. And we're starting to spread Kanban into these other parts of the org so that we can all work together better and have more of a flow-based system. So I mentioned that Scrum was no longer fit for purpose as our Kanban system. So I only have 2 minutes left, so I'm going to have to skip through this pretty fast. But I kind of think of this in two ways. What are the needs of the company, and what are the needs of the customer? So for the company, we need a system that's adaptable to changing information and needs. With personalization, we really saw that we kind of got fixed on solutions and would jump ahead into trying to build them without validating the needs, without getting feedback incrementally while we're doing it. And plus, we saw that Scrum was this kind of fixed system that wasn't adapting and changing with the company as the company was growing, as we were hiring people. So our common system is a lot more adaptable to those needs. I kind of have a little more evidence of that in a minute. Does it enable people's best work? I hit the clicker too soon, but yes. So for design, I kind of already talked about that. Designers have a physical place to track their work, and they're more integrated into our development processes. Same with engineers. They're not spread as thin across projects because we're limiting WIP better, and they have more of a connection to like, why are we doing this? What does the customer need? Where did this come from? And finally, does the company trust engineering? I love this picture. So this is from our Slack channel. Paul says, just saw the numeric metrics launch. I am truly in awe at the pace we have rolled out new features and updates over the last year. And Paul is on our sales team. And I think this is a really good example of how the rest of the company is seeing that these process improvements we're making are having an impact. So the company trusts engineering a lot more now. And with the customer, are we solving actual problems they have? So this is a list of reasons why customers churn. And this is a cross-functional process that showed there were about 210 reasons customers churn related to product gaps that we had. These were things we were not doing for years, some of which we'd heard for a long time. And we solved 152 of those in the past year, which I think really illustrates that we've been a lot more responsive to the needs of our customer and taking in input from our support team. So we're solving actual problems. And are they getting value out of those? I guess I'll put in a check next to that because our churn is starting to decrease. We were having a problem with churn in 2015 and 2016. And in 2017, we made a lot of steady progress at battling it down. And a big reason why is we built this system that's more adaptable to what are the problems that customers are having, what are their needs, and are we validating that we're actually solving those well. And with this CRT process that I showed, this also illustrates that we're solving their problems, and that's having an impact on our bottom line. So I'm almost done, don't worry. So next year, we're in a position to play offense. We're getting a lot better at making our system evolve and adapt over time. So what I want to leave you with is that we didn't make these changes overnight. This has been almost 2 years of work so far, and we got here through steady, incremental change. And the changes that we've been making are being reflected in the company's bottom line, which is hugely exciting. And this is honestly something that anyone can do. Everyone in this room could start making changes to their organization and transform the way they work. It just starts with one change at a time. Thank you.